The 90s is arguably the coolest period ever.
From rallying to touring cars, it was the 90s all day long.
They look so much cooler, don't they? You know, some things were just completely outrageous.
You name me another decade where there's more cars that's more special than the 90s. I don't think you'll find one.
Looking at the 90s, it was the birth of, you know, some new sectors in the market. And cars were different then. You know, each brand had a very different feel and look.
After the 80s, when stuff was interesting, individual, but massively unreliable, the 90s brought reliability and it brought dependability, and then the design really just took off.
Well, they were analog. They were light, they were nimble. I'm Jason Plato, and this is Cars That Made the 90s. And I first got involved in racing cars in '89. I went to a really famous racing school in France called the Winfield Elf Racing School. And up to the point I was there in like '89, they'd had 27 former students go on to become F1 drivers. So Prost, Arnoux, some bloke called Damon Hill, Jacques Lafitte, Patrick Tambay, and the list goes on. And that was my first time of really getting into single-seaters. That was Formula Renault. And I guess that was kind of the era where I really got into road cars. You know, I can remember lusting after, and did actually get one. I convinced my dad, I was working for my dad, I convinced him that if I hit, you know, sales targets, he should really get me a 205 GTI. And also the 1.9 one. And like, I guess most people who've ever been in one of those, I was facing the wrong way quite a few times on the highway. So that era of cars, you know, Golf G, GTI, all the hot hatches came alive. You know, the 90s was a good time. I think probably just thinking about the hot hatch craze, you know, that's when it begun. You know, manufacturers started to make your regular run-of-the-mill boxy four-door or your boxy two-door. They started to understand that there's a market here by sexing them up a little bit, by having, you know, a nice set of rims on, or, you know, a little tiny little rear boot spoiler or something like that. And they started to become, cars became cool then. But they were cars in the 90s which you could get yourself into something, you know, a second-hand Golf GTI, for instance.
Definition of a hatchback is just an everyday car that families have, put the kids in and go down. And I think the hot hatch was just the like an evolution of that, where, you know, whilst it is an everyday car, it's an everyday car with a little bit of oomph. There's no ABS, there's no traction control and stuff like that. So it's very much more a direct driving experience than, you know, maybe some of the other modern cars that typically have more capability than the driver.
I mean, they're ace, aren't they? Without a doubt. That's, you know, that is the icon, one of the icons.
I remember my first driving this after I'd spent a lot of time and a lot of money rebuilding it. And the first time I drove it, I just thought, oh, it was so nice to drive. And you're connected with the car. You have to drive the car. They're small, nimble, fast, and unexpected.
Now, I worked on a bit of the development on that car for Renault UK. Yeah, they're just brilliant. They drive well. I mean, they're quick, but they're just the handling on it is razor sharp. I had a Renault 19 16 valve, in that lovely Estoril blue, I think it was. Man, what a car that was. Some of the safety regulations in terms of where the seat could be and all the stuff you need in seats now, like pre-tension and belts and all that crap. The 90s car, when you sat in it, I sat in it like I would sit in a race car. So in other words, the wheel, I'm under the steering wheel. I'm in the car. 94, 95, I had the Renault 19. 96, I went to the Megane 16 valve, and I was all of a sudden sat on it, not in it, because the regs on seat position had changed and da-da-da-da-da. And do you know what, it upset me because I didn't want to sit like that. And all the late 90s cars, they all started to go in a different direction through safety, I guess, and kit, which they need to put in. So that's what I remember about sat in cool cars of the 90s. The driving position was like a proper driving position.
One thing I find particularly interesting is that, I mean, 90s cars, particularly the everyday cars, you forget they made millions of them. You know, the Ford Escort, the Ford Fiesta were Britain's best-selling cars for like 10, 15 years. There were millions. Ford Granadas, Ford Sierras, all of those sort of general humdrum boxes that people would go to work in are everywhere. Vauxhall Novas, Vauxhall Astras, Vauxhall Belmont, that was the one with a horrible estate sort of boot type thing on it, Vauxhall Carltons. They were cars that were ubiquitous. They were literally everywhere. And when you look back at old footage on, say, YouTube, and you just see a sea of them, these days, you don't see so many of them. We forget that the cars that were in their millions and were just everywhere, at some point they begin to dwindle, and you don't even notice the fact that it's happening. Because we're living it every day, you don't see the mixture of the road change. But all of a sudden, they're gone.
The driving experience in the 90s was amazing. There were no cameras. Okay, there was some, the feds were on the road, but they had a thing called a jam sandwich car. So if you were, alert, you could spot them. But also there wasn't the amount of cars on the road. I grew up in the northeast, in Newcastle upon Tyne, and 5 miles outside in Newcastle, we're properly out in the countryside. The roads were amazing, and consequently, you could enjoy your car.
I think we had the best cars in the 80s, 90s, and we had the best opportunity to drive those cars. I just love driving fast, in a sort of controlled way.
Yes, you had people would steal and race and drive fast, and then they would get chased by the coppers, and then they'd get taken down, and that was it. It was a nice, simple transactional process. That's what happened if you're an idiot. You got chased by the police in some lovely, powerful, beautiful car, like a Granada Scorpio or something, and then they would stop you, and that would be it. And everyone else just drove pretty well, actually, but more or less they could focus just on the business of driving.
I just love the exhilaration of driving, and of, if you like, taking a corner. And that road, I've been up and down it dozens of times, not just today, but just taking the corners differently, seeing how, which ways to go fast around the corner. And this car is perfect for that. Cars of the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, they're the cars. They're the cars.
It's the joy of driving. Learning how to down change correctly, learning how to change gear smoothly. It's part of the experience of driving a car.
You get in an old car, you start it up, you feel the vibrations, you feel everything through the steering. You are driving the car, you feel part of the car. Your own car become one. I know it sounds a bit obviously cheesy, but it's true, you know what I mean? It's like slipping on a pair of trainers.
You look at old footage of 90s touring cars and saloon cars, and look at old footage of the 90s rally cars. They're still changing gear and stuff. They're still using clutches and brakes and left foot braking. They weren't flipping paddles, and it's very much about that driver. And I think if you pitted a 90s driver against a modern day driver, I think there'd be something to be said about it. Do you know what I mean?
It still feels really special to drive. I don't think it ever feels like a normal car. It really does stir up emotions when you drive that car. It's something that really pulls on your heartstrings, And, I feel really happy driving it. It takes me back to the 90s, and hearing that engine roar is definitely something special.
The best days of motoring, sadly, I think behind us in terms of roads and infrastructure. I mean, all the roads now are knackered, aren't they? They're all potholed, and so you can't really be, pushing on the roads. I mean, I just recently did a North Coast 500. I did that last year, and my God, that's like going back to the 90s, because the roads are amazing. You've got the great view down a valley, so there's nothing coming, so you can take a bit of a racing line. Don't do this at home, kids. But those were the days. The 90s was it. And I think actually probably the 90s was when anyone, anyone that was earning a few quid, that was the era of the yuppie, was it not? It was the era of the mobile phone came out. It was an era where, cars definitely became, for youngsters, an accessory to their style, or to their... everyone was very proud about their cars. Can that be said in the 80s? I don't know. I think that was... car culture became a thing in the 90s, I think. Most of the cars which you could have, you could customise your car. The first thing you would do is you take out the stereo, which is a standard DIN setting, you throw that away, you take a parcel shelf out, you put some good quality MDF in, you put a pair of 6x9s in there, you'd put maybe an exhaust on it. And that doesn't really happen now. So I think that's where the car culture started. And probably, was there any car park meets prior to then? No, I don't think there was. Max Power magazine, I mean, that might have been 2000s, but certainly late 90s, it was all going in the direction of car culture. And I think that's because just the cars were cool.
People sometimes forget the 90s was just an era of extreme optimism and creativity. Car culture embraced that. So cars, music, films all sort of started to come together. You started to have a lot more car movies. The cars that were in those movies, therefore, people massively wanted.
We've all seen that same orange Supra on the screens, and especially for people my age who were 9, 10 at that time when that film came out, it was a big influence on us.
I grew up with Fast and Furious when I became a teenager, Gran Turismo, obviously as a younger child when that came out on the PlayStation, and just max power culture and everything from the late 90s, early 2000s. Seeing the Fast and Furious and seeing the RX-7 in the first film, and Gran Turismo, these weird and wonderful Japanese cars you'd never seen before, always just kind of caught my eye. You'll never see anything like this ever again.
It was quite different than it is today. Today, of course, you've got WhatsApp groups and you've got people posting stuff on Instagram and messaging, and everyone can get together and coordinate incredibly quickly. If you're talking, you've got groups like Supercar Driver that can pull people together, you've got Tribal Porsche on Instagram that can pull people together, and venues like Caffeine and Machine, and there are many of these sort of things starting, based around pulling people together. In the 90s, though, it was quite different. The 90s, it was basically, do you want to go to the McDonald's down the road and do massive donuts in it? But generally it was word of mouth. It was shouting out at people in a car that you really liked at the lights and saying, do you want to go over there? Do you want to go to Keynsham on Saturday? Keynsham, yeah, Saturday, McDonald's. That was basically how they started. That's all you're having. That's all you're flipping having.
There was always the old saying of race it on Sunday, drive it to work on Monday. If you owned a Nissan Primera and then you went on a weekend and saw two of them racing, you felt like part of it all.
This is getting too complicated for words. Leslie on the left.
Well, that's one of the unique USPs, if you like, about British touring cars, or touring car racing in general, in that people then get, you know, passionate about the brand that they happen to own. So you've got BMW versus Merc, you've got Volvo versus Nissan, Renault in there, Ford. And you know, there's that old adage, isn't it? Win on a Sunday, sell on a Monday. And that did ring true, actually. If you just look at Australian motorsport, you got the big race, Bathurst. Historically, that's only been against blue versus red, which is Ford versus Holden. And they separate the two camps with barbed wire, because it's, people get very passionate about their brand. And that's what worked with touring cars, and that the racing was frenetic. There was a lot of action, a little bit of aggro going on. Not bumper cars, but there's definitely some unavoidable contact, and people want to see that.
Over the hill. This is getting sillier by the minute. Off! James Thompson shovels Plato off. Look at Plato's Renault.
And also, you know, the fans, they got access to us. Well, we weren't locked in a cage like in F1. And I think that whole era of the 90s was super touring, when, you know, the Repmobile was a very serious race car. It captured people's imagination. I would have, my fans would be in that area, and Matt Neal's fans might be in that area. And you'd see a lot of, and also this was a camping site, so they'd all have a bit of a marquee up there, or not a marquee, but little small tents. Beer would be in there. They'd all be driving Renault, say, or Seats, or whatever I was in. On my debut, I jumped in the Williams Renault Laguna in '97. That was the best car by a mile for that season. They just got everything right. So yeah, you know, the fans throughout the years most definitely get behind. It's a bit footballerish, a bit, in that some of them are feral, but good feral. And I mean, you know, I've walked in loads of times over the years where I walked past the Matt Neal fans, clearly off their heads, because what they do in there at 8 o'clock in the morning, set up already, do you know what I mean? And been hurled abuse, but good abuse, and vice versa. Matt gets hurled abuse by my fans. And they're still like that today. And so they've captured their audience, and they've got a really, you know, knowledgeable, passionate crowd.
Cars of that era just had much more character and a little bit of aero design, and suddenly the wheels and the stance, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is actually, you know, really cool.
Please tell me, he doesn't drive that wasn't done for that day. He does drive round with all that branding on the car, and my name in the rear quad. I mean, I've got to meet this bloke. He's off his rocker, isn't he?
People can relate, you know, and you can go and buy the car, and even now you can still go and buy the cars that were sort of iconic back in the day.
Yeah, you haven't got to do much to these cars to feel like you actually own a race car.
Back in that era, if you ever saw a police car in your rearview mirror that was an 850, get out of the way. Do you know what I mean? Because they were rockets, weren't they?
If you've got a 90s saloon car, it needs to be full livery, full race car. You know, it's the best they ever looked.
Touring cars were cars that we could recognise, right? An F1 car is something that's really a fantasy to most people. A touring car is something that you've seen on the road. When you buy, for example, like an E30 M3, you are buying a touring car, just in a slightly lesser form. There's something special about having a car that you loved as a boy. I think that you're doing things that you grew up to is really important for your soul.
As a child, I could sit in my bedroom window and just on the mountain over there, I could watch the rally cars from my bedroom window, watching the rallying throughout the forestries just where we are here. So I grew up with the McRaes and obviously the Toyotas and UR Kankinen and Didier Oriel and all these kind of people. So for me, the 90s was the golden era of rallying.
There was just something about that era. You could get close to the rally, you could get close to the drivers. The noise of the cars, the fire-spitting monsters, and you could hear them coming from miles away, and it just the whole excitement of it all.
Well, believe it or not, I did have a Lancia Integrale as a daily drive, and I crashed it. I basically caught my mum and dad up to no good, and needed to get the hell out of the house, and then crashed my car.
For all intents and purposes, you had a car which looked and drove and sounded like the cars you could have in the forest. So it made performance accessible. We've lost our way a little bit in rallying nowadays because the cars are so technical. They're just not available to the privateer, which they were back in the 90s era.
Back then, the cars looked like the production model. You can go into the showroom then and buy the car that you saw rallying on the telly. And now they're nothing at all like the cars that they're supposed to be based on, and they're all space frame thing. And I think they've gone so far away from, in my opinion, the grassroots rallying and what it should be, which was close as possible to the production cars, and that's why the Coupe cars were so good. You know, the Lancias looked the same. I think Lancia had a similar thing where everyone went out and buying the Delta Integrale because it looked like the car they were seeing rallying. So yeah, much more influence than I think it has now.
These cars, these 90s stuff, the same with touring cars and British rallying, people could still achieve that look with their own road-going cars, and I think that was a lot of the draw to it.
They were extraordinary. I'd say probably one of the most iconic cars there ever has been. With the gold wheels, with that flat four strange engine note. I mean, there was the Subaru Impreza and then the Mitsubishi Evo. And they were hammer and tongs, weren't they? And I can never forget me and Tiff. He's in a Mitsubishi, I'm in the Subaru, or vice versa, I can't remember. And we're doing a dogfight at Castle Combe. And to this day, that's the closest we've come to actually killing ourselves, because we were out of control, but in control, if you know what I mean. Because they're brilliant, they're fantastic to drive.
And you could happily daily these cars now. The noise, the feedback you get, the feel you get. 90s Japanese cars, that's what they were famous for, and that's what they did, and they knocked it out of the park.
Every driver, no matter how good, great or crap, they make you look like a great driver.
They look so much cooler, don't they? They're just, like I said, they tried different stuff, and not all of it worked, you know, but it was just like, you know, some things were just completely outrageous.
The 90s for me was just this orgy of stats, cars design and possibility. It was just like there was limitless possibilities of what you could do. You could have any car, you could do whatever you wanted, times were good economically, and just it was just like an absolute halcyon day, really. Everything looked different and interesting.
Do you think it's important that we should keep them on the road? Should they be kept on the road?
Oh, without doubt they should be kept on the road. Yeah. Makes you smile. Oh, it makes me smile. I love seeing cars from that era.
Everything around it is so dull looking, and then the shining light of a car will just pull in. You just can't help but appreciate it.
There's no more efficient and kinder to the environment and the planet than recycling cars. Throwing them in scrap heaps and buying new ones, it's not a good idea. And you know, if I see a 1.9 205 GTI, I'll want to drive it.
That's what's so great about seeing an everyday 90s car on the road today.
It allows you to reminisce the times when you were less grey, less bald, to times when you had fun.
When I opened the garage, I still can't believe that I own these cars, right?
If I do see one, it'll just immediately catapult me back to what was going on back in those days. They're just great.
Happy? Get it off your chest.
And relax.
Breathe. You kicked yourself.